Thanks, Laura, very much for inviting me. As she said, I'm very excited about the Rensselaer Plateau. I'm really excited to share in describing how they were successful. So, as she mentioned, I worked for the Hudson River Estuary Program for about 16 years. My job, I was hired to help Hudson Valley municipalities conserve biodiversity. People ask me all the time, what do you say to them to get them to listen? So let's go back to 2001. There we are, that's me in 2001. That's the only picture I have of me working back then. So sorry about the eyes. But so when I first started working for the program back then, I was so excited to share my wisdom about biodiversity with municipalities. I was fresh out of graduate school with a degree in biodiversity. I had just left a job at the New York State Biodiversity Research Institute. I knew a lot about biodiversity. I also knew how important land use was to conserving it. Whoops. Because land use decisions that municipalities make have huge impacts on natural resources. I thought all I needed to do was impart my wisdom on municipal officials and they would thank me for enlightening them. You would probably not be surprised that it did not work. But I'm a quick learner. And so when Jim came to me in 2008, it was definitely February because I was pregnant with my second child, so I remember that very clearly. They asked me to review this presentation for towns. I knew the approach wasn't going to work. And Rensselaer Plateau was the only significant biodiversity area identified by the Hudson River Estuary Program that no one was working in, and no large conservation organization would touch it. As Jim said, Audubon recognizes it as important, TNC recognized it as important, and New York State recognized it as important since 1992, but nobody was willing, the community was just very resistant to conservation, and those large organizations did not have the capacity to do work there, so they just ignored it. So the presentation was very good in terms of technical quality and clarity, but they had this message in there. We urge the towns of the Rensselaer Plateau to develop master plans to prepare for preservation of open space for use by future generations and plan for future development. Now, open space plans are excellent tools for doing those things, but that's not what you say on the first date. We needed a new approach. This is going to work. And I'm not kidding about the conservation opposition. It was major. And so this sign showed up in 2016, is that right? I think recently. So it's not old, and you know it's not old, because if it were old, there wouldn't be a sign. This only happened once the Rensselaer Plateau became relevant and effective, because then they became a threat to certain individuals who have some issues. But so the vociferous opponent paid to have this sign made, put it on a trailer, even decorated it with flowers and drove it around the plateau in order to drum up more opposition to the Rensselaer Plateau Alliance. It wasn't particularly effective because all he really did was raise awareness about the Rensselaer Plateau Alliance. But it gives you a sense of how opposed some people were. Definitely major conspiracy theories. So what did RP do to be successful? So I identified 4 things, and I could definitely talk the whole day about why they were successful, but I'm just going to break it down to 4 things. 1, they managed expectations. 2, they identified their goals, their vision. 3, they listened. And 4, they built community awareness. So managing expectations. When we have good intentions to protect things we care about, we often can have unrealistic expectations. When I want to leave the house in 5 minutes and put my shoes on before I go, I know that I can do that. But when I go to my children, I need to leave the house in 5 minutes and get them to put their shoes on before they go. Seems simple. Seems like it will happen on the left. But I think this pathway is actually my daughter trying to get out, trying her shoes and get out of the house. So the first thing, this was true for me when I started working with biodiversity, and it was true for RPA's presentation. You can't expect one presentation to have a huge impact. So what kind of change can you be expecting in the short term? The original presentation suggested development of open space plans, but a more realistic, very short-term expectation was just getting a phone call returned or having a one-on-one meeting with leaders, which they eventually did. And not only is that's what your expectation should be, but you should also celebrate that as a success because it is a step forward when you're dealing with people who are so opposed to what you're doing. So you need to plan it out. You might develop a logic model or a lot of engagement and really think about how you're going to approach it and what you realistically expect will happen as a result. Think about the kids in the shoes, right? I want to leave the house. This is completely reasonable. We should just do this, but that's not what's going to happen. You have to have this dialogue, a little more than you'd like, to get what you want. And so the other thing about managing expectations is the time expectations, and I appreciate what Bill said about persistence and time and patience. It's really, really important. You should definitely be impressed by what RPA has achieved, but remember, it took many volunteer hours, over a decade or more, to get support for conservation work. And they clearly have that from the towns. What the towns are not yet doing is open space plans and changing land use planning. So despite all of that great work and the tremendous success that they've had, they aren't even doing what they asked them, they were thinking they were going to ask them to do initially. But they have incredible partners, and that partnership has truly allowed those other conservation efforts to go forward. All right, so the next thing is thinking about your goals, articulating what you want, because you need to know what you want to do, and then you need to know what you want them to do to help you realize your vision. And also, there's of course a dialogue on what the vision is. Again, the vision was towns are going to adopt open space plans. But once you start meeting with towns, that's not really where they were. That's not meeting them where they are. You need to have a dialogue about what their role in your vision is going to be. So, as Jim said, they knew they wanted to focus on land conservation for recreational wildlife. So the conservation plan was a process that could help articulate that vision more clearly and also engage others. And that's what I encourage them to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. So first, as Jim already said very well, is they listened to the officials, met with them one-on-one initially, and it was very painful in the beginning, but I think the one-on-one meetings were really important because they weren't ready to talk about it in front of other people. You can really get to know each other and start to build trust, and then perhaps not get so embarrassed in a large group setting when they say things like, I'm a capitalist, get out of here. So then that built into the quarterly meetings with supervisors and with dinner. Some of that I suggested and learned from the example of the Shonga Ridge Biodiversity Partnership that had done that as well. So the private meetings or meetings not in front of the public are really helpful for open and honest conversations. Public meetings are very important, but they serve a very different purpose, and you don't want to you want to know what's going to happen in a public meeting before you make a big ask. It's definitely important to do that back channel work. So they listened to community values. So in 2011, right after they got the grant to do the conservation plan, I helped them organize community values meetings to encourage people to talk about what they cared about on the plateau. So it was a map-based exercise, as you see in the picture. People drew on the map what they like to do on the plateau, what they like to see, they fish, swim, bike, hunt. And though those data were included in the conservation plan, and it's been helpful in some grant applications, that really wasn't the main purpose. It was really about having that conversation in the community. So in one town, skeptical community members approached the town leaders to say, is this something I should do? I'm not really sure. But fortunately, they were town leaders that that Jim had talked to in advance, and they said, yes, come see what it's about before you make up your mind. And we heard afterward that at least 4 people had changed their minds as a result of that workshop, where people were opposed or not really sure about it, and then came to say, okay, this isn't scary. I think I can work with these people. And then the opponent, the guy who made the sign, he also showed up. Do you remember that? He showed up with a buddy and was all ready for a fight. But the way we designed the community values meetings is there was an opportunity to grandstand. It's really small group work, and so when he realized he couldn't do that, he went home. So just a shout out to a colleague, Jens Hilke from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. He he introduced me to the idea of community values mapping, and I think that was a really helpful process on the Rensselaer Plateau. So they also listened to people's concerns, particularly with the conservation plan. The process was designed to get meaningful input from the community, and shout out to the Behan Planning Associates, who were the consultant helping RPA with that plan. A mistake that many organizations and governments make is to only have standard public meetings. You've all been to them, where your people stand in the front and you present some information, and maybe there's time for question and answers. Perhaps the mind is made up. You're never really sure if they're getting your input or telling you what they're doing. And they also, when they have these public meetings, sometimes people wonder why they don't show up. Well, they're not very exciting, and they may not feel like they're listened to. So there's not, there's a lot of reasons why people don't show up. Also because it may not be a convenient time or place, or it's not a situation that people are comfortable with. There's all sorts of reasons why you should really not just do that if you really want meaningful public engagement. So you need to go to them. And Behan Planning organized focus groups for different constituencies on the plateau. So large landowners, municipal officials, the forest industry. I'm sure there were more that I can't remember, but they really made, they went to them and really made customized invitations and customized presentations to those groups so that they were more engaged. And again, that was helpful. All the while, they were also building community awareness about the plateau. He already talked about something that happened recently with getting the weathercasters to say Rensselaer Plateau, which I noticed independent. I didn't know that happened, and I was like, Jim, you never guess. Paul Kayana started saying Rensselaer Plateau on the news, and he actually didn't say, well, that's because of us, because he doesn't do that, but then I learned that's why it happened. So it just gives you an example of, if you want to raise awareness, you really have to be intentional about it. It is very difficult for municipal leaders to support conservation, so their constituents don't. So you kind of have to work both angles at the same time. And so RPA took advantage of opportunities to raise awareness of the plateau in the community. So one of the things we partnered with them at the Estuary program on was landowner workshops, where we were, Laura and I were working with the Cornell Cooperative Extension to do landowner workshops around the Hudson Valley, and the Rensselaer Plateau ones were our most successful. I think definitely more than 100, probably around 150 people participated in workshops over the years. They learned about good forestry practices, including deer management, avoiding high grading, calling the DEC for stewardship plans, and trying to make sure that you're not, you don't just say yes to any logger that knocks on your door, because that's actually how it works. They also took advantage of community events that they could educate people at. So this is a picture from Grafton Winterfest. Grafton Lake State Park is a very popular state park on the plateau with about 300,000 visitors a year. And they are able to reach many people, children and families, through that. They also, I can't remember, did you mention the Traverse hike? So they also, Hudson River Valley Ramble, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. They created a 30 to 35 mile hike to raise awareness of the plateau and how large it is and how its recreational opportunities to help realize that vision, or help to help people engage in that vision. And so I can't really understate how much of a change this has made on the Rensselaer Plateau. They've made a huge difference in so many ways that's hard to describe. So I found some quotes that I think are helpful to illustrate that. And this is a picture from a view of the Grafton Forest, which is land that the Plateau Lands purchased in 2015, 2016, 2016.
December 2016.
So I think these quotes illustrate how people's perceptions change. So this is a view, the water there is the Tom Hannock Reservoir, which is the water supply for the city of Troy. I think it serves about 100,000 people. And it was purchased from the Gundrum family in 2016. But in 2010, Lois Gundrum, the matriarch of the family, attended a Forest Legacy workshop. So the DEC held a hearing because the Forest Legacy area was going to be designated. All it does is make the area eligible for federal funding, but people were freaking out about black helicopters and the Adirondacks and land stealing and all that stuff. So here's what she said to me, quoted in the paper. Why do we have to burden the taxpayers? If I can protect my property, you young people can do it too. Protect your own water quality. Until 2016, she's passed away, her children own the land, and they have sold it to the Venture Plateau Alliance. And so they said in the paper, we could have gotten more money if we had sold to the developer, but we did not want to go that route. One of the most gratifying aspects of being able to preserve this is the overwhelming support we've received from many of the landowners from whom we originally purchased some of the parcels, and from neighboring landowners who are as pleased as we are. So not only does that show the change of perspective in the family, which is also a generational change, but also talking about how differently the neighbors are reacting to this news. They weren't upset about it, they were excited, and they were supportive. And it was really not a friendly place for conservation for a very, very long time. And so I greatly credit Jim and the RPA volunteers that worked their butts off to make it happen. All right, so thank you. As Laura said, I am now a consultant, Strong Outcomes, and I'm working with communities and organizations to help them be more effective in community outreach. So if you are interested, please talk to me afterwards. And lastly, let this story be an inspiration to you that you can really make a huge change in your community. But if you take away nothing else, just remember you need to plan it out, get some help, and keep at it.